Hey, so this is a different kind of thing. For those of you who are used to like my wrestling content and things like that, I just wanted to kind of keep a record of all of this because I think it would be really cool to look at later on for me and possibly for the kids. But more than that, I just wanted to get my thoughts down in the fastest way possible. So a couple of weeks ago, my kids asked me, this is unprompted. Um, they wanted to start playing Dungeons and Dragons, and I have to admit something. I was really not just pleased, I was honored. Dungeons and Dragons had been such a big part of my life. I'm going to be putting stuff up here every so often. So I had, if not the original box set, one of the original box sets. And I remember having this, Keep on the Borderlands, right? And I was so young. Keep in mind, like Dungeons and Dragons started in like the late 70s. I probably started playing in like 1980. So I was 8 and I was taken with it right away. But I was so young that I didn't even realize that Keep on the Borderlands, where they were talking about a castle or a fortress, that kind of keep on the Borderlands, I didn't know that that's what they meant. I remember thinking they meant you got to stay on those Borderlands or else you're in trouble. Pretty funny. Um, I played from age 8. I was obsessed with the game. I remember receiving dice. My family didn't have a lot of money, but I remember they would always invest in books. And I remember being really excited because I would see a bunch of presents under the Christmas tree. And we were allowed to open one on Christmas Eve. That was our tradition that our family did. And I remember sneaking a peek, like trying to peel away the wrapping paper so I could see if I was going to get deities and demigods to go along with my friends and I. Once we graduated from sort of the box set, and then like the neighborhood kids and I would play. I was always into it way more than the other neighborhood kids at first, but we were all poor enough that but each one of us had like a book. So one person had like the Dungeon Master's Guide, one person had Player's Handbook, one person had the Monsters Manual, and then Monster Manual, which are books that I bought newer versions of a bunch of years ago, and I don't even know why I bought them. I probably got these. It's a Monster Manual, a Dungeon Master's Guide, and a Player's Handbook. I got them, I think, even before I had kids. I just missed having Dungeons and Dragons stuff around. I missed thumbing through the books all the time. I used to just read them endlessly, and slowly I acquired stuff. Um, but I played so much when I was in public school in like third, fourth, and fifth grade in Hawaii. I would just get my work done so fast that the teachers just let me do whatever. So I would just sit there mapping out Dungeons and Dragons stuff. I had just sheets and sheets of graph paper, and I would make maps. And I ended up having these two friends who were older than me. They were Donovan and Rebender. I still remember. And they were like 6 years older than me, and I was 12. And we just spent an entire summer every day in Donovan's um, garage playing Dungeons and Dragons and playing also the Marvel Superheroes game and this other superhero game called Villains and Vigilantes. And I would get to play sometimes, but people figured out rather quickly that I was good at running the game and I liked running the game. In fact, I remember DMing, dungeon mastering at the first Dungeons and Dragons convention that they had in Hawaii. And I was 14. And I remember it was a big deal because tournaments were kind of a different thing. You were under a timer, you had to follow the rules very tightly, that kind of thing. Especially back then. And I was 14, so I was the youngest dungeon master there by far. It was already the province of sort of like older dudes, and I was 14, but I had played so much for 6 years and run so many games. I wrote an article or two for like Dragon magazine, and I had written a module that got published. So I was like totally into this stuff, right? I remember the one of the articles I did for Dragon magazine was because the Deities and Demigods book made such an impact on me because I was so excited that my parents had gotten it for me, and it was kind of like it's not one of the books that you needed, but it's one of the books that was definitely cool to have. And I remember coming up with like a Hawaiian mythos of like adapting like Pele and Kamapua'a and like the Hawaiian heroes and deities and demigods under the like the Dungeons and Dragons system, and they were really impressed, and they had no idea I was so young. I met Gary Gygax at that tournament, and he was sort of questioning me. I didn't know who he was at first. He's the guy who like one of the guys who invented Dungeons and Dragons, and he came up to me and he asked like, "Why aren't you using all the rules?" And I'm like, "Well, a lot of the the going by segments rules and stuff, it sort of slows the pace of the game down. Like I had already had like booking theories, Um, but I just thought that that was really cool, and I had this amassed this huge collection of dice, and then as I got older into high school, I had a group of friends, good friends, that we played all the time. And during breaks, it wasn't uncommon for my friend Scott Tong to pick me up, and then other friends to join us, and us to play all day. And when I mean all day, I mean like 9 in the morning till midnight. And it was some of the best times in my life, not only because of Dungeons and Dragons, but we would play basketball and we would go rent movies and we would just hang out. And then once we got to college, and we had a little bit of money, then we could, we'd buy Sega Genesis, and we would play Sega hockey and Madden football, and but always Dungeons and Dragons was part of it. And we would play at school. We all went to the same school together for middle school and high school, um, and we would just play. And for my kids to ask me out of the blue, believe it or not, I never forced it on them. I would never force pro wrestling on them. It's just not something I do. Now they'd heard me talk about it, but my oldest said their friends were interested in the idea, and they knew I was the right person to go to. So I decided, yeah, let me go find. I had the basic box set, but I know the rules have changed and all this stuff. But I thought the box set's a good place to start, right? It's relatively inexpensive. It's not that much of a financial commitment. Let the kids make some characters. So I went and I found this. Well, one, I had to go like all the way to the Barnes and Noble that said they had it, but then they didn't have it. So then I went to where I should have gone to the first place, which is Coliseum of Comics, who never let me down about anything I've ever needed in the geek realm, right? So I got this box set, right? And but then something strange happened. Is I looked on the back, boop, and I read it, right? What's in this thing? It's like a 64-page adventure book with everything the dungeon master needs to get started. And I was like, oh, okay. The 32-page rule book for playing characters level 1 through 5. And I was kind of like, oh, well, that's good enough to get them started. But it's really this part, the 5 pre-generated characters, each with a character sheet and supporting reference material. And I noticed there were all these cards and stuff, I guess, that you could use in reference for the game and to sort of establish stuff in the game. And it makes sense. I think when Wizards of the Coast bought Dungeons and Dragons, they made it into a different thing where they could make money, and I don't blame them. Like the early versions of the game that I played were very much seat of your pants and required a lot of creativity and input. And it doesn't surprise me in the post cardboard crack era of Magic the Gathering and stuff that they would find a million little trinkets to sort of sell you to make the game easier. But really, it's about, changing how people approach the game. Because before, really, we just got by with some books and a lot of like intellectual elbow grease of coming up with these scenarios. Once in a while, we would use a module, but we usually found that my friends were so smart that anytime that I wasn't a dungeon master, for example, and somebody else would go like, well, let me try to run the game, especially if they were newer to our clique. My friend Ray Lesher, I remember coined this term, the substitute teacher, which is if Steve wasn't running the game, we would run over whoever the dungeon master was because we were just so knowledgeable about the rules. Like I said, I was sitting here and just reading these books cover to cover again and again and again. I mean, we knew this stuff. And in any case, we so that box set just isn't going to work. So I looked at the next level up, which was this, the Essentials kit, and obviously I bought it um, because they didn't have any pre-made characters. I mean, I know my kids well enough to know that part of the appeal of playing this game for them is to be what they want to be, and playing pre-made characters. I guess in the sort of video game era, like that's appealing to somebody, but the thought of playing a role-playing game where you're using a pre-made character, my god, never ever. I'm curious if cuz we always had all these complicated dice rolling things for how to generate the statistics for your character and all that stuff. I'm sure they'll have their own rules and their own theories. The kids have had their own dice sets. Just throughout the years, they thought the different kind of dice were cool. I'm sure I have a dice set around. I know that, for instance, somebody has bought me as a gift dice set because I've mentioned Dungeons and Dragons before. I used to wear Dungeon Master Guide shirt and all that stuff. So, anyway, this Essentials kit looks like it's a lot of fun. I mean, it's got a screen, which is awesome. I've made space on that table, and then a lot of this stuff I probably won't use because I kind of want the kids to just have the simplicity of like, here's your characters, here's a map, or just use your imagination, and we'll just go do this thing. And then if they stick with it and they really enjoy it, maybe get to the point where we just roll with the three books. And I'm really curious what they're going to come up with. I just have a feeling like I think about Dungeons and Dragons, and I've talked about booking influences for wrestling before, and I always cite, Giant Baba because of the way he changed Japanese wrestling and how it was booked. I always cite Bill Watts as the guy whose television shows I would watch, and I would think of wrestling in a different way. Like, oh my God, all these cliffhangers and all this, the hook and drag is I got from Bill Watts of this idea of like, oh my God, we can't show you. We'll have to show you next week. Like, he was always good at getting you to watch the next show. And then Eddie Graham, because he had such an eye for detail, right? He would make sure that, if some baby face was getting beat up, that the head baby face wasn't in the building, and we made sure we knew he wasn't in the building, or else why didn't he come and help, right? Those kind of details that people don't care about at all anymore, Eddie Graham cared about. And but if I'm telling the truth, the main booking influence for me in pro wrestling, and it's probably why I conceive of wrestling a little different than most people. I don't think of it as a pro wrestling person first. It's because of Dungeons and Dragons. Having to run literally thousands of campaigns, as we call them, in Dungeons and Dragons, all these characters, all this stuff, keeping the stuff in the mix, challenging the guys, but making sure that they still had a good time. All of that stuff really found its way into my thinking about pro wrestling as well. So I'm excited to go on this journey. What are the other videos going to be about? One of them's going to probably be about, here's where I thought my kids were going to go with character creation, but here's where they went maybe, or just different stories as I think of them. I mean, as you can tell, I have crazy stories about Dungeons and Dragons too. It was a huge part of my life from age 8-ish until I was getting my master's degree. And I never played as a grown up. It was funny because I would meet friends that would then start their own little games and stuff, and they would be so excited, and I would think to myself like, Jesus Christ, I did that for like 20, 30 years. And I guess I'm doing it again. Anyway, I hope you enjoy this little thing. These Dungeons and Dragons Chronicles, they're really for me and for the people who would be interested in them, and for my friends that grew up playing with me. I'm sure a lot of them will chime in with stories. I hope they do. I have my own memories. Like one of my memories, which is really funny, is I had one character that I would get to play, and he was called Maximilian Darkmoth, and he was an assassin and illusionist. Crazy. And he got to be really, really, really powerful. because I was really cagey about the game. Because again, I had run it for, at that point, even then, I had already run it for close to 10 years. So I knew everything backwards and forwards. So acquiring things and gaining power was not very difficult for me to do. And I remember one of my friends, Scott Tong, I believe, I'm going to give him credit for this. If I'm wrong, I'm sure somebody will correct me out of my group of friends. But I believe it's Scott Tong who came up with the God Cops, where he was just so tired of us running roughshod and everything. They just had these creatures called the God Cops that were like super powerful, and they would give us a challenge whenever we needed an ass kick, and in came the God Cops. And I remember the first time Scott was so annoyed because then we'd it was just one of those Kobayashi Maru things, man. Like if you presented us a problem that was supposed to keep us in check, we would obsess about how we were going to get around that problem. I imagine running a game against us was really frustrating. At times, it was frustrating for me to run it because my friends were so good and so smart. And they're so good at taking the technicalities of the rules and finding a way to maximize things. Um, but but I remember the first time we like killed one of his precious god cops, and he couldn't deny that we had done it because we had just basically housed this thing because we would work in such good lockstep with one another that he was like, "Well, it explodes. Everybody roll a saving throw at a negative whatever to make sure we wouldn't make it," and we didn't make it, and then he just busted out the percentage dice, boom, and he's like, that's how much damage everybody takes in the radius. Just to like say screw you guys. That way when he would send out a pack of god cops, we couldn't just like blow it off like no big deal, because it's like, oh my god, if they all explode, very conceivably we would die. So that's just one of the examples of the hilarious stories. Anyway, sorry, I'll go ahead and end this here, but I'm really thrilled. I think tonight I'm just gonna get into, because there's some character sheets in there already, so I don't have to run to the photocopier at Safeway like I did in Hawaii, where it's like, oh my god, we have to get this run off. Or when once I started like, I remember we would have character sheets and we would um, give them to like our fathers had real jobs. Like Scott's dad was a doctor, my dad was a lawyer, Ray's dad was like this real estate appraiser. So like any of them could like run it off for us. Or then we reached the point where it's just like we don't use pre-made sheets. It just didn't work because certain things we wouldn't need the sections to be as big as they were, and certain things we needed much more. So we just started. We had our notebooks for each one of our characters. I remember that too. Any case, I'm going to go ahead and throw the pictures in here and put this thing up, and away we go. Wish me luck with the kids tonight. I really do hope. I don't need them to fall in love with the game and continue the game. I love the idea that they asked me, and I love the idea that they want to do something that conceivably they could share with their friends as well. I think that was a lot of the reason they asked me, as well as something that I can do with them that doesn't involve like huge levels of technology and stuff. Pretty cool. Let's see how it goes.